Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Signal Hour, where we're going to try and find the signal in the signal. The signal has turned out to be X, Twitter. I have found that I am reading mainstream news less and less and less, and it's just not worth it anymore. The signal inside the noise for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post, it's atrocious. It's really hard to figure out um, what to do there. So don't know. And well, I do. I go over to Twitter now all the time and we figure stuff out. Now, this has been something that I think we could be doing here all the time is I could actually do a signal hour like almost every day. Things are happening so fast right now. So I'm going to cram a bunch of stuff in here. But remember, this is live. If you have comments here, I'm going to be reading them as best I can while I'm going along. I'll pull them into the conversation. And if we have comments that have been left or questions that are left over at Peak Prosperity, we will find those as well and surface those. I have just one of those today, but it's an important one. So we'll get to that. Now, let's see. Where do I want to start with this today? So let's talk about, to begin with, the shooting of Brian Thompson, CEO of United Health. Obviously, the carometer in the nation was pegged almost at zero on that whole thing, meaning people were less than charitable on the whole thing. Now, why was that? As we discussed in a piece that I put out just recently, the look at that thing sticking out of my back. Hold on, see if I can get that. It's distracting me. So obviously, healthcare has been a racket in the United States, and it's been an absolute disaster. And there's a sick care triangle that sort of comes around. It begins with bad food that not just, designed for the bliss point of sugar, fat, salt, designed to be addictive, designed to create metabolic disorders, designed with all kinds of at best we can say negligent oversight, but at worst it's intentional toxicities put into our food. These are food additives, red dye number 3, et cetera, and so forth. And then also the pesticides. And then there's increasing concerns around GMOs. In fact, once you start adding it up, you realize once is an accident, twice is coincidence. But when you see 50 things in a row and every single one of them somehow makes American citizens sicker, well, now you're starting to understand what the sick care triangle looks like. And it begins with bad food. And then to treat the symptoms of all that bad food, well, there's pharma products. We were never intended to go on a lifetime regimen of some external synthetic pill, but that's what we've been sold as a bill of goods by our doctors, all of that. And then once those chronic conditions can no longer really be treated symptomologically with these pills, then the hospital system steps in and replaces, valves and puts stents in and replaces knees and does all this stuff that it can do. And on top of all of that, like an evilly tentacly octopus, is the insurance companies who then say, "Oh, but Chris, we're regulatorily only allowed to take certain percent of profits." Well, then obviously you're regulatorily incentivized to have the highest possible revenues you can, because 10% of a billion is a lot better than 10% of a million. Obviously, you want the billion, not the million. So that's how the system has been in place, and that's how it's been going for a long, long time. And now it looks like this. So this is, I think, prima facie evidence right here. You look at this one chart and you say, wow, whoever has been in charge of managing healthcare outcomes and expenditures in the United States compared to any other country out there. Let me get my little drawing tool up and out here. Here we got Israel way over here, and Spain and Italy and South Korea, New Zealand, Portugal, the UK, Finland, Japan, Switzerland. Switzerland comes as closest because they're about running just a little over half what the United States spends per capita. But of course, their outcome is nearly 84 years of life compared to the United States, clocking in at just under 79. So those extra 5 years that Switzerland gets is 5 years times 330 million people would be about 1.5 billion person years that we do not get in the United States. 1.5 billion person years. In a person year, we could think of as a grandparent getting to spend a whole extra year with their grandchildren. 1.5 billion of those missing from the United States population over time. And that's just obviously unacceptable. It's disgusting. It's, you know, put it any way you want. I think it's not amoral. It's not, oh, Chris, these are profits. You know, this is immoral. And so what we're talking about is that now there's going to be a new sheriff in town. Trump is going to try very hard to get RFK Jr. in, who's going to start looking at some of this stuff, and we're going to maybe be able to bring science and some form of rationality, common sense back to the whole thing. Can't wait to see that. So let's see, what do we got here? Baked Rooster says, I'm not sure what the correlation between healthcare and life expectancy is. Wouldn't have more to do with environment and what a person ingests. Well, yes, it has a lot more to do with that, but the healthcare spending is a reflection of all that sickness that we've layered upon ourselves. And all that sickness leads to a lower health outcome or a reduced life expectancy. And by the time we're measuring it in reduced life expectancy, we're measuring the baked end of the bell curve. Obviously, there's a lot of diminishment, loss of life that's happened prior to that. And as a consequence of that, death is the last thing that happens. Way before that is all kinds of, just awful stuff that happens before then. So, and by the way, yeah, this to me is the big deal. Vitamin D scandal, folks. Getting illnesses simply because they ain't getting enough vitamin D, and doctors know this, but treat the illness instead of boosting your vitamin D, which would heal you. Recently, there was a tweet that went out. I think it was a robotic tweet because I saw it go across a bunch of so-called, engagement farming accounts. But it was a good question. It said, folks who rarely get ill, what's your secret? I said, that's simple. Vitamin D over 50 nanograms per ml, serum levels. Boom. There you go. That turns out that you get a pretty good outcome from that. So I completely agree with that. And the fact that doctors don't talk about it, they don't mention it, that it's not something they bring up every single, like if I was a doctor treating people in an office, first thing I'd do is I'd be reviewing their labs with that. I'd be looking at them. And if their vitamin D was below 50, I'd say, those are rookie numbers. We got to get those up. I'm quoting from Wolf of Wall Street for those of you who get the reference. So that obviously would be an incredible thing. And if we had vitamin D levels like that, all kinds of other things, it wouldn't just be the common cold that would be on the run. There are a lot of things, including probably cancers and skin conditions and all sorts of metabolic disorders that would be helped. Now, that would be one thing. Obviously, we want the food to be helped as well. And so we are going to be running a food webinar at Peak Prosperity. It's coming up in January. And you may want to sign up for that because that is going to be, we're going to, listen, what do we do at Peak Prosperity? We make this all simple as possible. I'm going to condense everything. You could do all the research yourself, but I want to save you time. And we're going to bring in the right experts. And because we know a couple things. Here's what I've learned at this August old age. Hopefully I'm starting to gain a little bit of wisdom. Data doesn't change people's habits, right? And that's what we're really after. Information without action could be interesting, but in the end, it's probably useless. We want information to inform us so that we can take new actions. And so I've learned that data doesn't do that. Well, for maybe 0.5%, the INTJs or whatever, a very narrow Myers-Briggs personality type will use that, or you take a lot of very, very specific training for something, and an engineer can use data and a scientist can use data in a very specific way. But when it comes to like this I ought to just be able to throw that chart up, and because we're all led by data, we would look at that and go, whoa, I know what to do. But we don't. So that's why we're going to have a food webinar about this to talk about, yes, what are the big things like this and what do they imply, and just how bad is the situation. So we have the cognitive frame for that. But more importantly, we understand that when we're trying to change a habit, there's two big belief systems that come into play around that. The first is our belief system that your eating habits are called a habit for a reason. They were probably ingrained from childhood onward. There's times I still eat like a 13-year-old because I've forgotten I don't have that metabolism anymore, right? And so it's conscious effort to break that. So that's part one. It's how do you begin to intrude upon your habits, right? And so there's a process for that. And the second thing is that we have to begin to go through the very hard process of understanding that the people who we have entrusted with our health, with our food safety, have not just dropped the ball, but have done it in a way where we can now say that it comports best with the idea that they're actively trying to make us sick rather than have people be healthy. And we know that because of this chart, right? And I can also prove that out. So anyway, we're gonna have that food webinar coming up, and that's gonna be awesome. So let me go now to this part, because this is pretty cool. And by the way, when I say how bad people are, like this is what we're up against. Remember, this is from Wyeth. This is in 1979. This is one of the things that actually, from an Alan Bernstein, this is one of the things that led to pharma companies getting immunity for childhood vaccines in particular. And it happened after this DTP vaccine by Wyeth. This is from internal correspondence. You can see there, August 27th, 1979. What did they do? Well, it turned out they had a really bad batch of this stuff. It was just manufacturing nightmare. And after they said the reporting of sudden infant death, that's SID cases in Tennessee, we discussed the merits of limiting distribution of a large number of vials from a single lot to a single state, county, or city health department, and obtain agreement from the senior management staff to proceed with such a plan. Are you kidding me? People sat down and go, babies are dying from our product, and the people are noticing. What can we do? Like, well, John, who got fired, probably said we could fix our manufacturing process so it doesn't kill babies. Nah, you're fired. But then Rick said, I know, what if we spread our vials around so that if there's a bad batch that kills babies, it's all kind of spread around. Nobody notices. That way, nobody notices. Literally, that's the solution they came up with here from Alan Bernstein. Nice job there, Alan. Thank you. Signed it down there. What? Not just a cad, not just a slightly horrible human being. This is a demon right here, whoever came up with this plan. And demons are all the people who signed off on it. And demons are all the people who've been covering up for this ever since. And so that's why when we get back to the killing of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, and a lot of people, the national carometer was like pretty much on zero. A lot of people sort of shrugged and said, what are you going to do? From the Sopranos, what are you going to do? The reason that came about is because this racket has been run on people for too long. And by the way, I get it. A lot of people say, look, violence is never the answer. I'm like, well, if that's true, then we shouldn't have a War Department. We shouldn't be bombing all these other countries. So if you're saying individual violence is never the answer, but state violence is an answer, then I'm going to disagree with you wholeheartedly, because I don't just distinguish between those just because one's operating at scale, right? I actually, in this regard, I fall very, very carefully on the words of JFK, who said this: those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. So what's peaceful revolution? Well, you want to have some sort of redress. If it turns out that we had evidence that, say, an individual was busy committing mass murder and the system wasn't going to do anything about it, the system's like not going to charge them, it's going to look the other way, maybe run interference for them, is going to do something. Well, what do you do at that stage? Like, you just shrug and give up because you're an individual? Only the state is allowed to make these sorts of calls. Why the state? The state is just a group of individuals. So that's the vibe where we're getting to. And so here's an example, right? It was just revealed that Bill Gates admitted that he's been using India as kind of a laboratory, to test experiments on, run human experiments, just kind of, just a laboratory. Now, obviously, they say here calls are growing for Bill Gates' arrest. I don't know how widespread those calls are. I'll make a call, but he needs to be arrested. This guy needs to be absolutely arrested. But he just says something like that, and then nothing happens. And so there's no consequences, right? And I'm going to show you other stuff today where you have people in power at the level of the state doing very bad things that they shouldn't be doing, that are illegal, and in many cases immoral, and nothing actually happens. So in the case of those Wyeth executives, I don't believe any of them ever got in trouble. Nobody went to jail. But we had the case of with Merck, Vioxx, supposedly a new non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, and NSAID, right? Oh, it's going to be this great new thing. It's just that during their clinical trials, it kind of hid the fact that it kind of caused heart attacks. And then they released the whole thing. The FDA knew this data also helped hide that. And together, hand in hand, Vioxx went out to the marketplace where it was pulled from the market after it probably killed, best guess, 80,000 people. Well, Merck got a fine, big fine for that. That doesn't do anything. Consequences, when you have a criminal action and you get a civil consequence, which is what money is, and that civil consequence is a fraction of the overall graft you made from that particular thing, there's no consequence. Like, oh, we made 3 billion, we had to cough one back up. Let's do it again, right? That's how this all works. We know it, you know it, I know it. And I think that's what we have to understand when we look at the social mood for what actually happened there with the national lack of care and response around murder. So the other thing is, we have to understand as well too that people can say, oh, because we're human, so a temporal association. Guy pulls trigger, guy dies. That was wrong. That wasn't an act of self-defense. But if guy signs piece of paper with pen, in a year later, 1,000 people die because of withdrawing medical care through a system and a process, it's just a temporal difference at that point. But one's a mass murder and one is an absolute murder. So this is what we're up against. And I got, see, one more piece here. Oh, we're going to go on to this cool thing that just came out with a drug a case against a drug company. That's awesome. And we're going to talk as well about, coming up soon, the banking secrecy stuff that just came out from a House subcommittee. So we're going to take a look at that very, very soon. But first, we're going to be, I want to tell you more about this food webinar. It's really going to be important. So we'll take a quick break and listen to that. Are you tired of feeling run down, maybe low energy? You know you've got some pounds you'd like to lose. Maybe you've got brain fog or something like that. Listen, we think we have the answer to all of that, and it begins with your food. If you're like me, you were shocked to hear testimony recently that unraveled and unearthed and exposed the idea that our food has been made addictive by addiction specialist scientists, the tobacco scientists out there putting things in our food. Maybe it also shocked you to discover that Europe does not allow all kinds of stuff in our food because they know it's toxic. What is the combined effect of all of this? Listen, we know what the data is. It's horrifying. The number of children showing up with type 2 diabetes, the total metabolic disasters unfolding across the land, marked by obesity, sure, but we have cardiovascular issues, concomitant rises in cancers, all of these things, and it all starts with food. Garbage in, garbage out. So what do we do about that? First, it begins with understanding the context. We've put together a very exciting, comprehensive food webinar that will expose the regulatory side of this and what is being done and why and how this happened to us. We'll be talking with Thomas Massey about that. We've got Dr. Ken Berry talking with us on the practitioner side and the solution side. We've got Tracy Thurman talking to us about the war on farmers and the war on food that has been happening. And Robert Barnes to help us understand that as well. Many, many other guests to both define what the problem is and what we can do about it. And we want to make it as simple as possible. Here's an example. Tortillas. Hey, maybe you're even on keto and these are carb-wise. So these have low amounts of carbs. See that? Carb-wise. Yeah, these are carb-wise, so keto-friendly. I want to note something. You see how fresh these look? Yeah? You see any mold in there? Any bacteria, any yeast, any sign of anything, any organism in there? These things expired in June and it is now November. So, what are they putting in our food that even black mold won't eat it? I don't know, but I've decided that if it's not good enough for black mold, it's no longer good enough for me. Once you start down that path, you realize that we have got sugar and preservatives and salt and seed oils and all of the chemicals that are unnecessary, and the fact that the food pyramid is absolutely wrong. So if you like effective information that leads to effective action, this webinar is for you. It's going to be the usual thing that my team and I will put on. It'll be organized, digestible, easily understandable, and most importantly, it's going to be actionable in ways that you will understand what to do. And I've designed it so that you would easily be able to send this to anybody that you love or care about, say, can we talk about this, and have it as a starting point for conversation. But what we really want, we want you to be healthy, because, well, who doesn't want to be healthy? Health is the number one form of personal capital you can have, of course. But given everything that's going on in the world, being healthy and vigorous and active are going to be dominant strategies and things you're really going to want to be carrying in. So, folks, it's time to get prepared on all levels. It begins here. It starts at home. It begins with our eating. And let's just make sure that we're not eating stuff that even black mold won't touch. With that, thank you very much for listening, and we'll get back to our regular programming now. Bye-bye. I still have that package. It's December now. Looks great. You know, you've probably seen the McDonald's hamburger. Evie and I went to Iceland last year, and great trip. I would go again. They have a museum display with a McDonald's burger that somebody found they'd left in a coat pocket. Like, it's 20 years old. Looks edible. And so it's just astonishing that we have things in our foods that even the world's most abundantly generous chemical factories, that's the yeast, that's the mold, that's the fungi, even they won't eat it. I'm laughing because it's kind of horrifying. And by the way, I agree with John Baxter here. You know what? He says, take your vitamin D to get healthier, but more importantly, get out in the sun every chance you get. Get in the sun, walk with bare feet on the ground, get those micro shocks that you need, your skeleton system needs in order to function properly, because it's a big metabolic thing, which we learned from Peter Simonson, and we'll have him on the food webinar too. It's really important. I've learned so much since COVID, and mostly it was unlearning all the stuff that I've been taught in medical school that was not actually true. So guess what? If nature designed it, I mean, you could do no worse than just say, listen, what were people doing, I guess, 10,000 years ago? Do that. And you will find that your body is tuned for all of that. So how about this then? I'll duck into this quick because this has been a big thing this week. Big signal coming in. We've seen all these images of these drones. They're flying around New Jersey for some reason. And Barbara Brown saying Governor of New Jersey says he has no idea what's going on, but that it's nothing to be worried about. That's what I heard him say. She says not there to protect the state. And let's see. And Peter Pantalones, the third, says stay alert, aware, and vigilant in actions. Heads on a swivel, folks. Are these drones the size of SUVs really Iranian? No. And who benefits from the U.S. going to war with Iran right now before Trump inauguration? That could be, but I don't think these have to be official. In my mind, these have to be official government things. Because first off, drones have software in them that absolutely forbids and catalogs areas where they can and can't fly. They can't take off unless you have that fly map installed. And so there's that. And then the second thing is, once they pop above a certain altitude, they end up showing up on a system. And these things are designed to be seen. These aren't like, I ruled these out as UFOs right away because, well, there's a lot of UFO pictures out there which don't include them looking like Christmas trees. You've seen these drone photos and videos. If you've looked at them, they're like red and green lights and blue, and they're designed to be seen. Now, I don't know why somebody wants us to see these things right now, but they seem to. Because these things are designed to be seen. Some of them obviously are jets. You can hear the jet engines as they fly over. Some of them are drones. You can hear the little whirlies. So I don't know what's going on. Is this like the people who did the crop circles? You know, because I think some of those people admitted to doing the crop circles. very ambitious stuff they did. Or the penguin foot guy who stomped all over the beach with giant penguin feet back in the day. Listen, there's the people like to do hoaxes, so it could be that, but I don't think so, because I think one of them would have crashed, been shot down, or otherwise intercepted, and we would have more of a story. The fact that it's mum's the word from everybody from the governor on up tells me it's an official something or other. Who knows why? But that's just how I'm seeing it at present. All right, so let's see. Got anything else here? Yeah, clown world in the sky. Yeah, I kind of agree. It could be that. And no stupid questions here. Winning streak. Okay. Any military dudes flying around them? Don't know, but ought to be easily solvable. So, at any rate, I'm not too concerned by that yet. We've had so many psyops run on us at this point. I'm very suspicious. Anything that comes up, I'm so jaded right now. My first question is, who wants me to see this and why? Right. And I don't know if you've seen, but post the Syrian debacle, right, with the complete immolation of that country and the collapse of that system over there, there's a very concerted effort right now, at least on my Twitter feed, to resurrect the image of these jihadists, because there's a lot of bad people on the other side who have just, there's no real clear good guys over there, but they're trying to make them good guys. And so I've seen lots and lots and lots of images of the horror of this prison in Syria. And maybe you've seen those too. People being let out of there. And I'm sure it was a terrible prison. And I'm sure there were some atrocities there, but it's been sort of saturation level. Oh, look at how bad this regime was. When I don't really see all that many images of what happened, say, in Israeli prisons, where a lot of people end up coming out missing limbs because they, as a practice, put cuffs on too tight with the intention of causing those limbs to just sort of atrophy and fall off. So it's just one of those things. If you see it in one area, but not in another area, if the coverage is unbalanced, you're being played. And that's the point of this whole thing. And of course, information war is the war. Michael Yon will tell us more about that. Now, I want to talk about this. Spying on Americans. And oh yeah, before we get there, I think, yeah, that's the number. 50 feet or higher in elevation in a drone will put you on the radar. So that ought to be pretty understandable from a drone side. So, hey, we're turning Canadian, and you never want to go full Canadian, as they say. Remember this, never forget this. I don't want to forget this. Trudeau vows to freeze anti-mandate protesters' bank accounts. I mean, at the time, this was insane. This is from February of 22. But looking back, it's even more insane. First of all the nutcases wearing their masks, even though all the evidence by 2022 says that doesn't do anything. Totally irrelevant. Just kabuki theater, performative mask wearing, because they're not wearing one, but he is. Anyway, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has taken the unprecedented step of invoking the Emergencies Act. The unprecedented step. Oh, it's an emergency, and we're going to use the Emergencies Act because why? Because, well, there were people honking their horns and putting up bouncy castles and otherwise having an unauthorized good time in downtown Ottawa, and they were cracking down on the anti-vaccine mandate protests. Now, as we've covered here before, the mandates were completely illogical, irrational, and should never have happened. Why? Because if you were under the age of 40 and not otherwise already ridden with some huge comorbidity, the risk from COVID was zero. Might as well have been zero. I mean, we're rounding to the nearest whole digit and we're at zero. And it was very, very, very low. So you can't mandate people take an experimental thing where the risks have been poorly characterized or even are uncharacterized for something which they personally don't have any risk to. But even with that, the only reason you could mandate a vaccine is if it would prevent that person from spreading it to another person. Of course, this COVID vaccine was known by then not to stop transmission. So there was no logical basis, no reasonable basis, no legal basis to mandate anything. And some people in Canada thought, that's a bad idea. So they exercised their rights in their country to protest that. And Trudeau said, well, guess what? Then we're going to freeze your bank account, which is pretty much a death sentence these days. I mean, it's a very draconian action to freeze somebody's bank account. It's like saying, hey, Justin Trudeau, we're just going to block your nose and your mouth. We're just going to prevent air infiltration for a little while. I mean, it would be an emergency pretty quick. Of course it is, because our bank accounts are our oxygen for conducting our lives, paying our rent, paying our mortgage, buying food, putting gas in the car, paying for medicals, whatever, everything. And here he said, well, the measures would be time limited, reasonable, and proportionate, and would not see the military deployed. Woo! Well, thank you for that, big guy. And with no need for court orders, this continues, banks can freeze personal accounts of anyone linked with the protests. You didn't even have to be at the protest. You just got to be sort of linked with. Now, this was awful. This is bad. But, and by the way, when you go down these authoritarian pathways and somehow you've rationalized to yourself that it's okay to freeze bank accounts, hop, skip, and a jump, next thing you know, within a year or two, you're saying stuff like this: Canada bans more types of firearms because this would make our people unsafe, and proposes donating the guns to a place where people can use them to kill people. Just having trouble with the Canadian logic here. Obviously having trouble up there too. So another 324 firearm varieties. Obviously, as they say, nobody can just pass one stupid law. it's a thing. So now we get to America, who refuses to be outdone. And we have now this interim report here from the Committee on the Judiciary and the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. This is run out of the U.S. House of Reps on December 6th. This just came out. Reading through it. Well, let's read through a little bit of it together because my eyes popped up. The executive summary, they said, financial data can tell a person's story, including one's religion, ideology, opinions, and interests, as well as one's political leanings, locations, and more. Because of this data's usefulness, federal law enforcement agencies increasingly coordinate with financial institutions to secure even greater access to Americans' private financial information, often without legal process, and use federal laws like the Bank Secrecy Act to do so. The so-called Bank Secrecy Act. We're going to keep secret what we can use your banking information for. Not your bank secrecy, not yours. Theirs, obviously, because that's been the whole thing for a while. Now, based on non-public documents, continuing on that last sentence, this report sheds new light on the decaying state of Americans' financial privacy and the federal government's widespread warrantless surveillance programs. Now, listen, if you want to have a warrantless surveillance program, go for it, but you're going to have to amend the Constitution because either you have laws or you don't have laws. The supreme law of the land still remains the U.S. Constitution, and much to the vexation of the powers that be, it's written in plain language that you and I can understand. The Fourth Amendment, very clear on this subject about warrants and about people being secure in their persons and papers, right? Which meant you had a right to privacy. It was a right. And anything not specifically handed to the federal government or specifically carved out and enumerated as a power to the state, unless it's specifically granted therein, belongs to you. That's how it's supposed to work. So if they want to have warrantless surveillance programs, go for it. But you're going to have to come through the front door on this whole thing. Just have the debate. Put it out there and have the debate. I don't mean bury it as a new paragraph in a 3,492 page omnibus spending bill right there between pet care subsidies and, a new footbridge somewhere in Iowa. I don't mean that. I mean a whole thing where you want to amend the Constitution because you think warrantless spying on Americans is a really important thing. You got to explain why. Let's do that. So this is carrying on from that introduction, the executive summary carrying on, quote, the committee and select subcommittee began this investigation into government-led financial surveillance after a whistleblower disclosed that following the events of January 6, 2021, Bank of America voluntarily and without legal process provided the Federal Bureau of Investigation with a list of names of all individuals who used a BOA credit or debit card in Washington, D.C. region around that time. Okay, if you have a Bank of America account, go ahead and close it down. You're not going to want to use that institution whatsoever. There ought to be consequences for this voluntarily and without legal process. That's how much BOA cares about y'all, right? So it's a horrifying practice. And then people are like, oh, it's terrible. Why did that CEO get shot? That's never an okay thing, right? Well, this is also never an okay thing, or shouldn't be. What's the remedy? I hope there's remedy. I sincerely hope that people start, I don't know, we come out of our national fog of whatever happened, the trauma that was induced on the nation on 9/11 that said anything that sort of sounds like intelligence or security is a no-brainer. Always default to that. Never default to preserving privacy or protecting citizen interests. Always default towards the security state. It's that important. But can we be honest? How many actual terrorists have been caught in the last 20 years? I'm not talking below 100 IQ people who were groomed carefully by the FBI so they could set them up and then arrest them. Not that. I mean, how many actual terrorists have been stopped? How many terror plots that we know about? Well, if it's like, if you can't even think of one, you'd have to go searching for it. It tells us it's a fairly negligible thing. Maybe they've caught a bunch and we just don't know about it because they had to keep that secret, preserve means and methods, maybe. But in the meantime, prosperity comes from freedom. It's a subset of freedom. If people are free, then you get prosperity. We see this in Europe right now, that Europe has a lot less freedom. It's got this whole bureaucratic state, the whole technocracy, laws upon laws upon laws, and their economy is just like, oh, and it's about to tank hard because they passed a lot of stupid rules about green energy. That's going to cost them dearly. It already has, but I mean, even more. And so we can just look at that and compare and contrast and say, look, obviously from a principle standpoint, having a robust and vital middle class is actually a really important thing. You would think they would understand that, but I don't think the people at BOA are thinking this way, and I don't think they understand that killing the golden goose is not a good way to go. You don't get more eggs faster. I don't think they know that. They should read that book again. In yellow at the bottom, quote, on March 6, 2024, the committee and select subcommittee released an interim report revealing that federal law enforcement had used sweeping search terms like MAGA and Trump to target Americans and even treated purchases of religious texts or firearms as indicators of extremism. Oops. I'm definitely on a list. I've done all of those things. So definitely on that list. Love to get my file. Carrying on, quote, that report detailed how federal law enforcement derisively viewed American citizens, treating Americans who expressed opposition to firearm regulations, open borders, COVID-19 lockdowns, vaccine mandates, and the deep state as potential domestic terrorists. I am every single one of those things. 100%. And I can't disagree with Roger Edson saying Idiocracy, the movie, was a roadmap for our future. Sure seems to be that way. I don't know. But as Severny Republic says here, terrorizing people, our government, every day. Well, they're treating us for sure as potential domestic terrorists. If you think of things like if you protested open borders, come on, there's not any other country in the world that has open borders. Open borders is a stupid thing, objectively. Obviously, I've covered this in detail before. I'm not talking immigration. My grandparents immigrated. Immigration is a multi-step process where they carefully vet who's coming in. It's just like you're a landlord and you decide, who do I rent to? Well, you probably run a credit check and maybe a reference to, and you look into maybe a criminal history, whatever. You're going to vet the person carefully because you'd rather obviously have this person inhabiting your house than maybe those people. All right, that's normal. And when you're hiring, can you imagine a company had some sort of open border policy? Yes, we hire exactly the first person who walks through the door for any position, right? Obviously, you don't do that. But somehow we're supposed to believe that having an open border where we have migrants, not immigrants who've been carefully selected, but just mass migration of humans from a low resource zone to a high resource zone. Yeah, just all of them, any and all. Obviously, that's dumb. But if you said that, you were considered a potential domestic terrorist by the regime, the Biden regime, which by the way is a terrorist regime as far as I'm concerned at this stage. They've operated very, very badly. And so to consider Americans their own citizens, they obviously hate their own citizens. And we know this. We know that they've hated their own citizens because of the open borders, because of the COVID-19 lockdowns, because of the vaccine mandates, because of the perpetuation of this deep state, because the people in North Carolina are now freezing to death at night. And Biden is busy sending $1 billion to Africa because there's some rain victims over there, or now money going to Syria, or money going to Ukraine, or going to Israel. Money's going everywhere except to our own people at Lahaina, people in misery, people who are falling through the cracks here in the United States, people in disaster zones. They've never, ever, ever been on the priority list for the Biden administration, Team Biden. Now, when I say Biden, I use his name, but obviously he's mentally defective and hasn't been capable of being president in quite a while. I don't know if you saw his teleprompter went out just a couple of days ago. I should have pulled that up. It went out, and it was like somebody pulled the plug on the Biden animatron robot. Just like couldn't do anything. So, but think about that. Federal law enforcement derisively viewing Americans, citizens, and as the enemy because they dared to express opposition to firearms regulations, open borders, COVID-19 lockdowns, vaccine mandates, deep state, all that stuff. That's pretty bad. Now, I'm really hoping that maybe a page has been turned. I'm really hoping that Kash Patel can come in and begin to open this up a little bit. I'm hoping that not all federal law enforcement is this way, that there are plenty of patriots and good people in there, people who operate with a sense of morality, a sense of, hey, we're Americans first, who've just been sort of like waiting for conditions to change. I'm hoping we can just find the bad apples who've been involved in this and root them out. And by the way, I'm a little draconian this way. I think anybody who has been treating their fellow citizens in this way should never, ever, ever have a security clearance or work in government ever again. And really, honestly, ought to have their record tags so that if I'm trying to hire people, I would know that if they were one of these knuckleheads, I could just exclude them right away. But that would be me. So carrying on with this report, one of the bullet points, they said here, the government's access to Americans' private financial data is widespread, virtually unchecked. In 2023, financial institutions filed 4.6 million suspicious activity reports, SARS, and 20.8 million currency transaction reports, or CTRs, with FinCEN. 4.6 million, 20.8 million. Again, how many terrorists do you know about have been actually caught, if that's what their angle was? Or are they just sort of grossly fishing for any sort of like criminal activity? But if that's the case, how come they couldn't figure out what was going on with P. Diddy or Epstein? Just have some questions about that. What's the point of filing millions and tens of millions of these reports if you can't even catch the most obvious thing ever, right? How did Bernie Madoff manage to operate for 15 years with the SEC not noticing, even though Harry Markopolos gave them the entire thing on a silver platter in a spreadsheet a decade earlier? Inquiring minds want to know. Maybe the point of this isn't to catch people. Maybe the point is to harass people. Just making a guess. In 2023, they say here, quote, government officials ran 3.362 million searches of the filings in the FinCEN query program. 3.3 million. In addition to the FinCEN query program, approximately 27,000 federal officials have access to your banking data through the agency integrated access program that allows certain federal agencies, sounds like all of them practically, to download the data onto their own systems, which who knows what happens at that point, right? Gone. Downloaded. It's yours now. Not this agency's, belongs to this agency. In total, according to FinCEN, 472 federal, state, and local law enforcement, regulatory, and national security agencies have access to the BSA reports, the Bank Secrecy Act reports. Wait a minute. Local law enforcement? Have you ever known that maybe not all local policemen are maybe cut from the same cloth? Most of them are great. Few of them aren't. Sometimes, they have like their own little petty grievances and enmities and all this and that, but your local law enforcement now, note to self, don't ever tangle up with somebody who has access to my finance records, because who knows what they can do with those at that point. And it's just another tool. It's just like unbelievable that the Fourth Amendment, you should be secure in your person and papers. It's very clear. When my papers include my financial records, I guarantee you this wouldn't take a lot of interpretation. You don't have to be a constitutional master to understand that back in the day, the founding fathers would have considered your papers to have been like your personal bank records, your personal private record of what you'd spent and who you owed and what your financial dealings were. Those would have been your papers. The contracts you had would have been your papers. Anything you signed where your life was contained in a legal and a financial framework, those are your papers. Now they're like anybody can sort of search them anytime, millions of queries, local law enforcement, telling you. No bueno. Yeah, I agree with this. Khalees says, yeah, root out bad apples. It's a systemic problem, though. And it is a systemic problem. And I don't know what you do about that, because if you cut off the head of a hydra, 7 more pop up, right? Because it's the system. You have a hydra system. It's not the head wasn't. It's what you saw. The head was the problem, but wasn't that. Crypto Prepper says, why didn't Gary Gensler stop FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried's firm, after meeting with SBF and not meeting with Coinbase? Could it be political donations? Right? Quite probably. So let's see. I got 10 minutes left. Oh, I got to do this. I'll do this one next time because that one can wait. I want to do this in the time I have left here. So let's turn now, change to this energy. My favorite, I love energy. Energy is everything. Energy is everything. If you understand energy, so much becomes clear. So we have a question here from Peak Prosperity member John S. writing down there. And again, if you have any questions, just post them at Peak Prosperity and I will probably get to them. Hopefully I can. Sometimes they take a little more prep, such as this one. John S. asking, could you please go into more detail about what you think will happen with energy shortfalls starting in 2025 and the fallout associated with it? Are the energy shortfalls the start of the collapse? If so, what timeline are you preparing for? Okay, 3 questions, but they're all good. Yes, I do think that we're going to start experiencing energy shortfalls in 2025. I've been saying that for a while. The Energy Information Agency of the United States and also the International Energy Agency. First one is the EIA. The second one is the IEA. Don't confuse them. How could you? They've both been saying, oh, the market's going to be super supply. Just very recently, a month and a half ago or so, the EIA, U.S. Energy Information Agency, was saying that there was going to be 1 million barrel per day oversupply of product in 2025. Boy, what a difference a month can make. Now they just cut their output. Actually, now global demand is going to exceed supply by 100,000 barrels a day. And so there's a huge outlook reversal that just happened. And so we're going to see an actual supply shortfall coming into this next year. And it looks like it could be pretty persistent. This could be an entire longer episode. You have to understand where we are in the shale patch story in the United States. That is now a more mature story, no longer this explosive spring growth, spring chicken story. And looking at where the world is as well. And also the fact that oil has not been priced at a level that's constructive enough to cause companies to go out all over the place and really throw capital expenditures at projects, especially the expensive projects that are capital intensive. So that would include offshore oil and things like that, deep sea, things like that. So that's been true for a while. I'm looking at least a number of years of persistent shortfalls. And you would think, though, if you're coming into shortfalls, you know what would be wise? Make sure you have a deep inventory, nice deep pantry, big fat supplies kicking around. Turns out, according to the EIA, again, in their short-term energy outlook, global inventories are actually really low, lowest in over a decade. and are going to be even lower in 2025. So global inventories are really down. They're not at dangerous levels, but they're kind of lean at this point in time. So yeah, at any rate, yeah, hide that one for now. Oop, there we go. Yeah, so you can see there that it's now we're just coming in kind of lean, as well as I just said. Oil in the Permian. So let me see. Let me pull this up really quick. I have to change programs here real quick so I can display this. So the EIA also just put out a recent report, and this is pretty interesting. So let me bring this up, make this full size for everybody. So I love looking at where we are in the oil story. So let's pull this up. Okay. So the United States producing lots and lots of crude oil by different regions. Hopefully you can see my cursor here. You can see that everything that isn't shale oil is other down here on the bottom in this big brown thing. It has been going nowhere forever. It's just barely holding on. And then we had the Bakken play here in yellow, and that expanded, but it's kind of, if you notice, a little flatty flat here for a while. And also the Eagleford, if you look at the blue line, it's not really getting any thicker or thinner. It's just kind of flat. The whole story has been the Permian here, this big pinkish sort of a zone. And you can see here, it's been a little, this is where we are now, and it's going to be basically more or less flat. So overall, they're projecting that the United States oil production is going to be a little flat. Going to be a little flat. Not a crisis. Definitely not a crisis. But it's not that explosive growth we saw before, where oil is just going like this. So this is why I think it's going to be even less than they think, because we saw Chevron just a couple of weeks ago. They were going to be cutting their Permian capital expenditures. So you have to spend money to get oil out of the ground. That's called CapEx. Their CapEx is going to be less. They're going to be shaving $1 billion, or about 18% of their CapEx was going to be shaved in the Permian. So it's a big player. Chevron's about, I don't know, 1 million barrels per day out of the Permian, and there's total 8 coming out of there. I'm rounding wildly. So they were a pretty big chunk of it. Exxon is the other big giant player in there, and they are now saying in the Permian are guiding here for, get my laser pointer again, 1.5 million barrels per day of Permian production in 2025, which was below what they said just a little while ago, which was 1.6 million barrels per day. And also they're going to keep flat CapEx next year. They're not putting more money in. And so there's a declining reinvestment rate coming in here. They're going to put the money back into dividends. So point is, we're seeing what they're calling more discipline in the Permian, but we're not going to see the growth there anymore. So you're going to start hearing more and more about this over the next year or so. And I think it's really important. I think it's stupidly important, because if we had the inflation experience we're having right now, could very much replicate what we saw in the 70s. There was this big burst of inflation. It moderated, and then it went off to the races again. Why? Because we had this OPEC energy crisis. The price of oil shot up a lot, and that, of course, bled into everything, because oil is a component of pretty much everything. So if the price of oil goes up, everything goes up. Okay. Could we see another explosion in the price of oil? Well, sure. In particular, because energy, as I said, is everything. We're coming into this particular period of time with fairly light inventories, right? Which means, I think this would be a bad time to start a war in the Middle East with inventories low, wouldn't it? It would not be a good time, bad time. And as well as Matt Bracken put here, I totally agree with this idea. He says here, quote, energy is the lifeblood of global power. Empires go to war, foment coups, fund revolutions, and impoverish their allies to gain control of energy flows. Pipeline gas is a lot cheaper than LNG gas sent by ship. This is why the USA blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, because by blowing up this little red line, now maybe they could get this red line, but oops, it needed to go through Syria. Hey, good news. Syria is now open for business, I guess. So this is, if you understand, like if you just track this sometime, just take a look at all the places where you can put red X's on a map where you can say, wow, there was trouble there. Libya, Syria, right? Looking now at Romania and Georgia, Ukraine. And you start mapping energy pipelines, not the old ones that are off of decaying fields. I mean, for new exciting pipelines to bring new exciting supplies of energy, you'll find a pretty stupidly high correlation between those things. This is a good explanatory function. At a minimum, you want to understand what's happening in the world, just understand what's going on with energy, which means you need to understand this. 2025, we're going to see a little bit of non-OPEC. So there's two big blocks out there. There's OPEC, oil, petroleum exporting countries, OPEC, right? Saudi Arabia, et cetera. And then you have everybody else, and those are called non-OPEC. So the non-OPEC countries together collectively are going to see maybe about just 1.4 million barrels per day of oil production growth. But then very low after that, and very low, and just trending to below zero. So this means every other country except OPEC, that's it. And by the way, oil demand just grows every single year. I know they keep saying we're going to have, less oil demand and all that because electric cars, but just never seems to happen. So it's in the future. Next year, we'll get it right. As soon as I'm a Missouri, show me guy, right? Show me state. Show me that. I'm not actually from Missouri, but I like the motto on the license plate. Show me, right? So as soon as I see that oil demand actually is going to go down as a consequence, not of economic contraction, but because people bought electric cars or some other reason, then I'll say, oh, okay, you got a point here. But for now, I don't see anything to dent oil demand going forward. It's going to grow. Maybe it'll grow less. You hear things like oil demand falls. That's like the inflation story. What they meant to say was the rate of growth in demand of oil is a little bit less than we thought. So instead of oil demand growth being 1 million more barrels next year, it might be 800,000 instead of 1 million, but it's still growing. Like oil actual demand falling only happens in a couple of contexts. And one would be the OPEC disaster back in the day in the 70s, where they actually geopolitically shut off the valves. And the other would be a recession. And particularly COVID caused oil demand to go backwards. Barring economic, decline, oil demand goes up. So we're going to see a lot of this going forward. And hopefully we can get some change in the tenor. Hopefully the new incoming energy secretary, Jennifer Granholm, has been a disaster. That lady knew nothing about any of this stuff. It had no interest in it. It wasn't her thing. But maybe we got somebody who understands this, because as goes your energy, so goes the entire productive capability of your country. Everything is a subset of energy. Full stop. All the rest is just a subset. So if you have energy, you can do a lot. Now, as Jess Pixie is writing here, oh, wait, I put up the wrong one. So sorry. Clicked over. Energy prices are going up in January in the UK, and they're already very high. Just make people electric and gas bills higher. Yeah, that makes sense. So listen, as your energy costs go higher and higher, your country gets poorer and poorer. Full stop. Just how it works. First, you see the erosion of energy-intensive industries. They leave, or they just shut down because they can't operate. If they're lucky enough to have the capital, they can just flee to a lower energy cost area. If they aren't lucky, they just have to shut down because they can no longer be competitive with products that are made in lower energy cost environments. So when countries both have free trade and high energy prices due to their green policies, they're actively telling you, we want our industries to shut down. It's an act of hatred against the productive enterprises of their own country. Just how it is, unfortunately. So, and let's see. SDRC saying here, UK cannot survive on renewable energy. Not that much environmental energy available. Yeah, and even if there was enough environmental energy, it's not ready for prime time. And we know this, right? We know this because sometimes the wind doesn't blow. And nighttime, which is an argument against solar, because we don't have the batteries, we don't have the storage. It's not scaled yet. It's not ready for prime time. It's just not. No name here saying UK has the highest electricity costs in the world now, and it's my country, and it's being collapsed deliberately. And it is. This is a deliberate act of collapse. This is being done by somebody for reasons that I wish they would just come out and explain to us and say it straight up, right? Hey, we're going to take this country down. And we're doing that because we think it's Bangladesh's turn or whatever. I don't know what the story actually is, but it's deliberate because nobody's this stupid, right? No, it's not that hard to understand these things. But when a really bad narrative comes into play, it can be really hard to unseat that narrative. So I'll close with this today, which is that a representative, Jamal Bowman from New York, an actual congressional representative, wrote here in December of 2024, wrote, "Dear white people, I don't know why I feel the need to keep talking to you. I don't know why part of me still has hope for you and for us. Some of you are too far gone, but maybe enough of you aren't and will join us in fighting to end white supremacy." Um, and so I thought Nate Hochman had a good take on this, which was, I know social media isn't always representative of broader trends, but it's striking how quickly this stuff fell out of fashion. 4 years ago, this post would have 100,000 likes. A-list thought leaders would call it powerful and brave. People would write op-eds about it tomorrow. And then you see in the red triangle down below, red rectangle, it got ratioed hard. 5.1 thousand likes. One of them wasn't mine. And 18,000 comments and out of 5 million views, getting 5,000 likes is not a lot of people resonating with this anymore. But this was a bad idea, a narrative that came in. Like if you just reversed the colors and said this in the other way, if I reversed the colors, obviously this would be branded for what it is. It's a deeply racist comment. And obviously this train of thinking by Jamal Bowman here is doctorate of education. Don't educate my kids. It has a narrative running that basically says, the way we combat racism is by being racist. It's just a broken narrative, but that broken narrative now is what's driving some of the energy policies in the UK and is going to immiserate the entire continent the further it's allowed to go forward. You're going to need a new energy policy. We're going to need one here in this country. I hope our new guy coming in is going to have that ability to put that new narrative in there because we need it, and we need it really bad. Energy. If you understand energy, you understand everything. And if you want to understand energy, you could come by Peak Prosperity or look for me on YouTube. I got a bunch of videos. I got a book about the crash course, and it describes how energy and the economy and money tie to also the environment. When you see those 3 E's put together, economy, energy, environment, at that system level, you can begin to make sense of what's happening. A lot of what's happening in the world is not surprising to me in its broad strokes. The details, sure. I didn't know that things were going to happen the way they did exactly, but that they're happening, not a surprise. So that's the work I do in the world, is trying to figure out how these pieces fit together. Broad summary: plant a garden. Get ready to be resilient. Take care of yourselves and your families, and just get ready for the possibility, if not the probability, that times are going to get tough, because we still have a lot of people in power, with hands on the levers of power, who are basically not fit for purpose, not grown adults yet, and not able to conduct themselves in a thoughtful, common sense fashion. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. It's been great being here with you today. I love the comments. We'll be back on Wednesday at 1 o'clock with the next Signal Hour next week, and look forward to seeing you then and there. All right. Bye for now.